So, Cliff, Ray, what did you think?
Well, firstly, there's something wrong with my memory because I've actually seen this film before.
Oh, right.
Um, I did recognize the image of the film. I thought, but you never know whether you've seen the poster or, but I'd actually forgotten that I saw this in 2018 at the ICA. So I saw it on a big screen. So I already had some notes that I'd made at the time, which was really interesting. And at the end of those notes, and so I did read those notes. So unusually, I know we try not to do any preparation for these reviews, but unusually I read my notes. So I've got more background than I would normally have
Mm.
on a review. I think what I did put at the end of those comments was definitely worth a second watch. Uh, so I'm quite happy to have come and had a second look at it. I really liked this film. I think I liked it the first time I saw it. Um, I'm surprised I'd forgotten I'd seen it, actually, how much I did like it and how much I enjoyed it the second time. And I could almost happily watch it again a third time um, because it merits it. It's such a great film, I think. I really love the structure of it or the way it's put together because it actually has quite a clear narrative. There is a story and you do get a little bit involved in the story. The story is actually quite well done. It's not done in a linear way. I mean, obviously we kind of start with something that's towards the end of the story. But yeah, so I kind of like the fact that there's a clear narrative, but at the same time, it's not clear. There's many potential meanings of this film. There's many ambiguities. There's many abstract elements to it. And I just think it's a perfect combination of something which is, kind of a clear narrative and enjoyable just as a watch, but then also has so much potential meaning and leaves you wondering, so many questions. I think I love how open the film is as to whether it's actually a deeply religious film, whether the guy is totally insane, or whether this is actually a film about a metaphor for colonial powers and kind of well-known people making, well-meaning people making assumptions about indigenous populations. And, but I think it's potentially a combination of all three. And, it's very difficult to decode in a specific way, but it really works for me. We've touched on this quite a lot in the reviews recently about, whether an artwork is best watched. If a film is actually an artwork more than an entertainment movie, let's say, whether it's best seen in a cinema or a gallery. I think this film actually is a pure artwork. It's a beautiful, pure artwork that could be, would sit well in a gallery. I mean, I think you'd have to have seats because you couldn't stand there for an hour and a half watching it. But it for me, this is a really interesting artwork. It's full of poetry. It's full of aesthetically interesting things. So I think it's a great artwork, but actually this really merits being shown in the cinema because visually it's an amazing experience. And I think, having seen it on I think I saw it in the small screen and at the ICA, so it wasn't the smaller screen. So I didn't really see it on the big screen as such. But I think it really merits being seen on a big screen. The thing, this film almost left me breathless at times. It felt epic. It felt biblical. It felt like it was so big that it was biblical and like it had the whole story of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation was represented in it. I kind of found myself almost my breath taken away at times. I was profoundly moved at times. you know, it did, in terms of my own spirituality, there were points at which it did move me, and I did feel, oh, there is some spiritual depth to this film. But then I love the fact that that was slightly removed. It never allowed me to kind of stay quite in that place, and I really like that. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of parallels with Jesus Christ in this, including the image. You know, even the image for the film. I remember seeing the poster in the ICA and thinking it was a film about Jesus without knowing anything about it. The guy resembles, you know, traditional kind of images of Jesus a little bit. But, you know, there's no dogma in this film. You know, I'm really interested in religion in films, but I think it's really hard to do in a way that works without being cliched or without being, you know, kind of too religious, for want of a better word. I don't really want to see dogma in the film, but I loved that about this. It felt like it was really deep and meaningful, and an experience. I really, really liked the format of this film. The way there were different types of images. Some of it looked like archive footage, looked like it was kind of documentary footage. Some of it was clearly new footage, but made to look like archive footage. The whole issue of the film degrading and the kind of holes in the film, which were, you know, more and more visible, and the lines on the film. I had made in my notes that I'd from the previous time I saw it, that I'd read that he actually buried the film,
Wow.
the film in his garden, to encourage this process of degradation of the film. So actually there was a natural element to the way it became degraded, because it was actually, you know, genuinely kind of damaged by this process. But I think that worked really well. You know, I think when you kind of add distortions to an image, and, you know, these days I guess it's easy to do that digitally. You know, I mean, obviously there's something special about burying it and it being a kind of natural process of it degrading. But, you know, I think it's so easy to get that wrong when you start playing with, you know, a breaking up image, or, you know, but I think this gets it really right. And even at times, you know, it becomes so great that you can barely see the image. But I really love it. I really found it visually arresting throughout the whole film. I thought the soundtrack was fantastic. You know, it just was never, I mean, there was never kind of long periods of music with the film, but the way the film did use music and sound, I thought was really effective. You know, I think the bits I found moving, the music was definitely part of it. It like wanted you to be a little bit moved. But then other times the music just really reinforced this sense of uncertainty and, you know, kind of the thriller element of the film. I thought this was a really special film that, you know, is a work of art, but definitely is a great piece of cinema that, you know, I would enjoy watching again in the cinema. I loved it.
I agree with you completely. I thought it was brilliant. I also agree that it's incredibly cinematic, a fantastically rich cinematic experience, and I would love to see it in the cinema. I also think you're right in pointing out that it's got a very strong narrative, even quite a familiar narrative, and that works for it, because it's this kind of chaotic story of this guy pursuing this sort of Fitzcarraldo-like mad mission. And it does that thing of replaying certain scenes from different points of view, so that you're not sure who he's, you know, these are reasonably familiar ideas and tropes and scenarios, and I think that worked really well for the film. That it had a strong cinematic narrative backbone. I found that really compelling, and the stylistic references seem it seems really steeped in early cinema. There's that kind of weird folkloric feel to it that it reminded me of that very strange, I think it's Swedish, that movie Haxan, which is generally considered the first movie about witchcraft. I think it's made in like 1902, and it's this really peculiar silent film with these people like dancing around the fires and stuff. It seemed to nod in that direction. There seemed to be sort of bits of Georges Méliès, if you like. The early, the special effects are very mechanical and analog, you know, like when he's got the water going backwards, and he's clearly got like drain pipes up his sleeves or so, but it's very, very effective. And it also reminded me a bit of the final scenes, the apocalypse scenes. I don't know why it made me laugh, but it did make me laugh to learn that the apocalypse in Spanish is El Apocalypse. I quite like that. But those final scenes seem to almost, for a moment, I thought he was borrowing stock footage from D.W. Griffith's Intolerance. And it looked like it had Abel Gance's Napoleon in there as well. So I really appreciated how cinematic its style was. And it was really interesting to hear you say that he buried the film in his garden, because one of the other references I put down was Stan Brakhage, who was obviously really interested in making his own film stock. You know, he shot things on, like, he made film stock out of leaves and moths and things like that. And so it reminded me in its feel and texture of films like Dog Star Man, you know, those really experimental, strange avant-garde cinema. But it was thrilling that all of that was kind of sat on the back of a very strong and propulsive narrative that, as you say, was really engrossing. You know, there is something endlessly fascinating about that story of the guy who is at once pursuing this stubborn and admirably deranged ambition that seems both, you know, fantastic and nuts. You know, the guy's mad. He's trying to create a kingdom in Patagonia, you know, crazy. There's something very compelling about that kind of weird underdog story. The thing that struck me most about the film and impressed me most about it was that it is deeply strange, this film, but never feels indulgently so. And there were really really peculiar touches that in lesser hands could have felt so affected that I would have really turned me off. And I'm thinking of the papier-mâché faces by which the actors are sometimes covered for large parts of the film, for no sort of obvious literal reason. And what it reminded me of was a conversation you and I had, not on the podcast, but about substance versus style, you know, and this idea that we were talking in the context of literature rather than film, but that I was sometimes a bit frustrated by people who differentiate between the two, as though, you know, I prefer a book that demonstrates kind of substance over style. And my frustration is, well, why on earth would you choose between the two? And I think this is a great example of when a piece of work, whatever it may be, a film or a book or whatever, gets its style right, then the decisions it makes are correct because it makes them. You know, it's like the reason the characters have papier-mâché faces for a while, the reason that feels right is because that's what the film decides to do. And the style of this film is not just metaphorical. It's not just an addendum. You know, it's not like so the character's mental state breaks down occasionally, and so in representation of that, we have degraded film stock as a metaphor or literal expression of that in a breakdown. It does function like that, but it does more than that. The style is the substance. You know, and that's, I think, the sign of a film that has worked out the best way to tell the story it needs to tell. It feels very organic, very authentic, even while being deeply peculiar and unconventional and idiosyncratic and strange. And I think that's the mark of a really genuinely successful work of art. And like you, I thought it was a really impressive film. And I was kind of surprised by it because Well, I don't know why. I started watching it and I thought the dialogue was a bit kind of dreamy and strange, and it felt a bit like a Field in England, you know, that what's his name, guy who did High Rise and all that. I liked that film, but I was worried that it was going to be kind of self-consciously strange and a bit sort of meandering and weird, but it really gripped me, and I was completely thrilled through the whole film. Thought it was really cool.
Yeah, yeah, that's great, isn't it? It's I did actually think of you know, when we saw a month ago or a bit more, maybe we reviewed on the podcast the film Birds or How to Be One, and that had the play within the film that, you know, we both felt was kind of avant-garde film at its worst, almost, you know, that neither of us, I mean, I like that film much more than you generally, but I did struggle with that element to it. And in some ways, I think the court scene with the masks, there was some parallels with that. It was almost like we were going to a reenactment of the court scene, you know, from time to time. And, you know, at face value, seeing odd looking people in these paper mache masks, you know, just looks a bit too avant-garde for its own good, you know, at face value. I absolutely agree with you that in the wrong hands, this would really have not worked in the same way that we both objected to that play within the film. But this really worked. And I can't put, you know, it's really hard to put your finger on why it worked, because it was absurd and, you know, kind of strange and odd, as you say. But I just found it, you know, that it was really well handled. It was beautifully put together and just always compelling. And I think you're right about the style is the substance, because I think if this film was just showing in a gallery with no sound, so you weren't watching it as a movie, I think you would stand and watch it. You know, I think it would be, I mean, obviously, I guess some of the parts may not be, it may not work for everything, but I think that, you know, a very big proportion of this film was aesthetically and poetically beautiful to look at, and, you know, was just an interesting work of art in itself, but fitted totally with the film. You know, wasn't just clever filmmaking. The whole thing sits together so well.
Yeah, it's really really interesting way of making that point, isn't it? By comparing this film to the one that I disliked so much, and particularly to, as you say, that use of the play, because it's fascinating, isn't it? What makes a film? Why does it work in one film and not in another? And I think I always come down to this idea of trust. Does one trust the filmmaker? And in the case of Birds or How to Be One, I didn't trust that filmmaker's intentions at all. I thought it was just silly, you know. Whereas this one, you could feel there was an artistic integrity at work here, which I know is a bit of a highfalutin and silly phrase, but you know it when you see it, right? And I think it's interesting. You often come, as you say, come back to this idea of would something look appropriate in a gallery? And I guess something in me sort of is a bit resistant to that. That's even that line of inquiry. And maybe this is not what you mean, but I think the reason I resist it is because it almost suggests that is it even so good a film that we could even put it in a gallery? Do you know what I mean? As though a film that is perfectly successful in its own right is not enough. As though it's even better if you could see it in a gallery. You know, like, well, I think this film works on its own terms, and on its own terms, it's a film, and I think it's a wholly successful film. And I don't think it would be appropriate to put it in a gallery because it's a film, you know, and it belongs to be seen in the cinema. This one, it's an interesting issue, and we do keep coming back to it. I don't know exactly how I feel about it, but I guess I don't really understand why, you know, this idea of something being better somehow if it's good enough to be shown in a gallery, you know, or that if something is only a work of art if it's not just a film, because I think perfect cinema is comparable in its stature. You know, really strong cinema like, you know, Bresson or something is comparable in its stature to the great visual arts of, you know, of the times.
I mean, I would say in response to that I don't think it's a case of whether a film is good enough to be shown in a gallery. I think it's, for me, the distinction that I've been making when we've been discussing it is the difference between kind of a film and a work of art. And I know that that's not necessarily a straightforward kind of classification, because I think this was a really good film and a great work of art. But, you know, I think my point is that a film should be shown in a cinema and a work of art should be in an art gallery. So, you know, you wouldn't go in, you wouldn't go in a cinema and see and sit and watch a sculpture. You know, that's definitely in an art gallery. So if a film is a pure, if a video work is a pure artwork, it might not work in a cinema. And I can't remember the example we had a few times ago. We reviewed a film recently on the podcast, didn't we? Which I thought is not a film for the cinema, is a pure artwork and would be much better shown in a gallery. And so it's a question of where it's more appropriate to be shown, rather than, oh yeah, this film's a good enough art house movie that could be shown in a gallery. It's definitely not that. I think the thing about Ray is that it's completely a work of art. It's so poetic, it's so beautiful, it's so moving, it's so enigmatic as a work of art. I think it's a great work of art, but it's also a great movie. So, you know, even though it's a pure work of art for me, it fits. You know, this is not a Hollywood movie, is it? This film would never be considered for an Oscar. This movie would never be shown in, you know, one of the big chains of cinemas. You know, it's not conventionally cinema in that way, but because it is a work of art, but I do think it's so cinematic that it works as a cinema experience.
I think I see what you mean. I mean, it's a terminological problem I have, I suppose, this idea of a pure work of art, and I think a good film is a good work of art. I mean, I know what you're saying. There is a difference between, you know, the sort of cinema you and I naturally usually sort of respond to, and, you know, conventional high concept Hollywood cinema. There's obviously a distinction there, but I guess I don't really follow the idea of like a pure work of art as opposed to a successful film, you know?
Yeah. Well, I guess the thing is, it's easy to think of, say, you know, if you made a film of, you know, following an ant for 4 hours, that could be, you know, you could decide that that was a work of art and you could show it in a gallery. And, you know, no one would have to sit and watch it for 4 hours. Someone might, and they could get something from it, but you would wander into the gallery and you'd watch this ant, sometimes moving, sometimes not. I think that's an example of something that, I mean, you know, would be, I mean, it's not necessarily a great work of art, but it would clearly be a work of art that could be shown in a gallery, but would not be, you know, wouldn't be right to see in a cinema. If I
would go and watch it and then review it.
Yeah. I might
2.5 hours in where he picks up this leaf and it was just.
Yeah, maybe we should make that film. You never know. But yeah, so that's great. We both highly recommend this film.
Yeah, excellent movie. Yeah. And next up is a movie called Isadora's Children by Daniel Mineville.
Looking forward to it.